Right after making some official announcements for the PlayStation 5, Sony has also just released the 7.0 update for PlayStation 4, which has two very important changes to one specific feature: Remote Play. First off is the fact that Remote Play has now finally made its way to Android devices. When Remote Play was first introduced for Sony in general, it was something you could only use with specific Sony products like a PlayStation Vita or the Sony line of phones, and earlier this year it made its way to iOS devices, which you could use on iPad and iPhone. But the immediate question people had when that opened up is, when are we going to be able to do it on Android? And the answer is finally now. Now, the way this all works is very simple. You just have to make sure that your PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 4 Pro is updated to the 7.0 update, and then on your Android device, download the Remote Play app. Once you've done that, all you have to do is log into your account, and bam, you will be connected to your PlayStation. One important thing to note is that it does connect to your primary system, so if you own multiple PS4s, make sure that the one you want to connect to is marked as your primary. Once you've done that, you're good to go. Every time you log into Remote Play with your phone or other Android device, you'll be able to play your PS4 remotely. And this is anywhere. It's not like just something where you have to be on the same Wi-Fi and you're within the same household. You can leave your PlayStation 4 Pro at home, hooked up to the internet, leave it in sleeping mode, and then anytime you want where you've got a good enough connection, you can Remote Play through your Android device. Now, how well this runs varies a little bit based on how good your internet connection is, as well as what system you're running. If you have a regular PS4, you're going to tap out at 720p resolution, whereas with a PS4 Pro, you do have the option to do 1080p instead. Also, depending on how poor your internet connection is, you do have the option to display at a lower frame rate as well, so that'll make sure things are at least running a little more smoothly, but if you have the strength for it, obviously, higher frame rate is preferred. As for the actual experience of using Remote Play once you're all set up, it's actually really smooth. Again, Wi-Fi plays a very important role in this, but if your connection is strong enough so you don't experience things like dropped frames or anything, it's actually really cool. So you actually have two different ways of playing. One option is to have your phone in portrait mode, and while you're doing that, all the touchscreen controls are going to be on the bottom, while the regular image is squished at the very top. And the upside of this is that while you do have a smaller screen to work with, your thumbs are never covering the actual action, which depending on the game is very important. Something that is really important to note about this too is that because you are relying on touch controls for a lot of these games, how well it works depends a bit on what game you're playing. Certain titles are just going to make themselves a little easier to play on the go with the touchscreen. For instance, right now I'm playing Spider-Man, and I can do well enough to navigate the city and, do some basic level fighting, but it gets a little tough when I want to do things like press R2, X, move a stick, and just do multiple commands all at once when it's on a shared touchscreen. It works, but it's definitely better for simpler action games, or especially anything that gives you a more kind of turn-based setup. Spider-Man. This is not the best game to showcase, but it's working just enough. Now you can also hold the phone sideways, and the big upside of this is you're going to see a lot more of the screen. It's going to be a lot clearer. The downside though is touchscreen controls are now going to overlap. So depending on the game you're playing, you might not find that to be a preferred experience because you're putting your thumbs on top of things that are going on. But it definitely looks a lot better because you're actually filling the screen as opposed to having that one little smooshed image that you have in portrait mode. Now, the other big aspect of this update isn't just what devices support Remote Play, but also what Remote Play allows you to use, because now you officially have the option to use a DualShock 4 controller, provided that you're running the latest OS for Android or iOS, specifically iOS 13 or iPadOS 13 and Android 10. Now with iOS, this means that any fairly recent iPhone or iPad you own will be able to make use of the DualShock 4 in Remote Play. Android, sadly, is a little more limited because Android 10 isn't available on quite as many devices, so it's going to be a limited subset of them, such as the Pixel. Now, if you do have the ability to make use of a DualShock 4, I highly recommend it. It not only keeps the same kind of feeling experience as using a PlayStation 4, but it is really easy to do. If you've never used your DualShock 4 with another system before, it's actually pretty easy to set up. All you have to do is grab your controller and hit the PlayStation button and the share button at the same time and hold those for a few seconds. After you do that, the light bar is going to start to flash a couple times rapidly, and it's ready to pair to other Bluetooth devices. So from that point, all you have to do is go to the relevant Android device or iOS device settings, find Bluetooth, find the DualShock 4 controller in there, click it, and you're connected. Once you've done that, anytime you start up Remote Play while the controller's connected, it just immediately works. One of the really impressive things about this is there really isn't that heavily noticeable of an input delay. You'd think that playing on a PS4 that's in another location connected to the internet with another device with a wireless controller hooked up to it would have some kind of huge input lag. Really doesn't at all. There is a tiny bit, of course, but it's not enough to really negatively impact gameplay. I wouldn't recommend trying to do maybe a competitive online shooter in this situation, but if you're just doing a single player game you like to mess around in, or just something that's more calm and relaxing, super easy, seamless experience. And a good way to showcase this is the fact that the PlayStation I'm playing on right now, my primary PS4, is not in this room. It's not here in the office. It's back at my home. So this is nowhere near where the system is, and yet I'm playing on it perfectly fine. This is honestly so cool because of the fact that you can take the PlayStation 4 you already own, a controller you already have, and then take a phone or tablet you already own, and you just have a new portable way to experience your PS4. Again, I think the constant disclaimer here to keep in mind is that your experience will vary based on the Wi-Fi available, but if you have a strong enough Wi-Fi connection, this is amazing, and I think it's a really good kind of preview of what a lot of PlayStation's competitors are going to start messing with, like Google Stadia and Microsoft xCloud. Now, to be clear, PS4 Remote Play is not the exact same thing as what Stadia and xCloud are trying to do, although it shares a little bit with xCloud. But the experience is very much the same. This idea of having an on-the-go device that is not actually running the game you're playing, but instead connecting to it remotely and letting you have that experience. Now, the important difference in comparison here is that Google Stadia, instead of having you use a device you already own, like in this case with the PS4 Pro, Stadia is having you connect to their own dedicated servers, which is kind of interesting because it's the idea that you're paying for a service that you don't have to own the hardware for, so there's not that initial buy-in price. Now, xCloud from Microsoft, on the other hand, is actually both of these services combined. You're supposed to be able to play on the Xbox One, Xbox One X, or future Project Scarlet Xbox, whatever they call that, remotely if you'd like, or you can instead not own any of those systems in the first place and, making use of Microsoft's own servers, play xCloud on the go that way. And you know, revisiting remote play and thinking about what it is exactly Stadia and xCloud are trying to accomplish makes me think again about the kind of the benefits and merits of each approach, and it really does reinforce this feeling I have of remote play and xCloud just make more sense to me than Stadia does. Stadia is interesting in the concept that if you have never owned a game system before, if you have access to nothing else previously, and you just want to start trying out games and use whatever device you have on hand, that's kind of neat and interesting because you're starting a library from scratch. But if you've been playing games a while and this idea of being able to access them on the go with a phone is cool to you, it's this really weird feeling to think, oh, I already own all these games on my PlayStation, I already own all these games on Xbox, whether it's on my system installed or just something I have the rights to, whereas Stadia is, again, kind of this fresh starting point where you have to buy these games all over again. And that to me is a super huge strength from the standpoint of someone who has been a lifelong gamer, because when I look at these different services coming out, I am much more likely to maybe not even focus on the ones that use their own dedicated servers and instead just be like, oh yeah, I already have this game on my PS4 and I want to play it while I'm on the go. I can do that right now. And in the future, when xCloud comes out, I'm very likely going to make use of games I already own and play them using xCloud's own servers or connect to my Xbox One X on the go, depending on how those kind of features differ, which we'll find that out once that, service actually exists. This to me is a super important edge, and it's not necessarily that my mind is totally made up about which one's going to be the best service, absolutely, because that's crazy. They're not actually all out yet. But once they are, I'm curious to see how the experience on each of them is going to either confirm or completely change my mind.